Hello, everyone. Welcome to Art Talk Session 12. We're here with Peter Mohrbacher. How's it going, man?
It's going really well.
You might know Pete from his show One Fantastic Week, as well as his project Angelarium, also from doing work on magic cards and such. So, Pete, I guess we'll start out in the typical fashion. Like, how you want to talk a little bit about how you got started with art, like your journey, like in a nutshell?
Sure. It all started in 1983. I was born. The I didn't get started on art till I was kind of later in life. I think later by artist standards. Like I was 16. I was way into anime. Um, I was a depressed, angry teenager with like no emotional outlets. So I was like drawing pictures of anime characters as like a means to try to connect with the world, which is like I think there's a lot of angsty teenagers that this is the reason they come to this stuff is they're like, oh, I want to see a story about a sad guy piloting a robot. And and yeah, I dabbled with the art with it, and as soon as I like started drawing, it was like this great outlet for me to be able to like actually interface with people because when I was I was never really that good socially, so then like when I was drawing, I had something to talk to people about, and it was really good. And so I got to college doing that, and I was one of the only people in my school that was actually like drawing and painting regularly, even though it was one of those AI schools, art schools, franchise ones that got sued by the government. Um, and when I got out of there, I self-taught a lot of digital painting skills based off of like tutorials online and sort of backwards engineering the work I was seeing on places like TV and Art and CG Talk. And it was like what I found was really interesting was that because I wasn't really coming at it from like a serious commercial standpoint, like I didn't really know what that there was like people grinding away to try to get very particular jobs. I had started to develop my own voice in that interim, and it gave me I had actually started Angelarium back in my last year of college just on a whim. I had found the angel names and I started painting them because I thought they were cool concepts. And so I've always been sort of painting intuitively and starting, from a very conceptual point and not really worried about how it fits into the industry too much. Um, and that led me to getting a job working in the game industry pretty early out of college, just like a year or so out of college. I got a job full time working at CCP North America on a vampire game called World of Darkness that never came out. It was in pre-production for 8 years. And it never came out. It got sold off to another company that might be actually making it though. So who knows? They tell me not to show the stuff still because like somebody new owns it. Yeah, that's where I cut my teeth was out at CCP, and then after layoffs hit there, you can only put a game in pre-production for so many years until everyone gets fired.
Yeah.
I ended up at doing like Facebook games out in California, back when Facebook games were like at the peak of their earning potential. And there was like this awesome fucking art team over at this company, Kebab. It was like Alan Williams, Carlo Ortiz, Mitch Mohrhauser, who I think is now like working sort of quietly freelance people. He doesn't really post that much. Brian Mattias. Like, there's like the people who are, this is people who are like, in many cases now are like working in film. And, like Mitch Mohrhauser was designing characters for Final Fantasy 15. Carlo Ortiz designed a costume for Doctor Strange. Alan Williams was designing kaiju for Pacific Rim. And, they were all working, like, making Facebook games and, like, slot machine games and stuff at this company at the same time a few years back. It was really wild.
Wow.
And, like, over that period of time, I kind of got this inkling that the thing I'd been doing on the side the whole time, which was making Angelarium pieces and going into conventions and trying to sell stuff online, was actually, like, a better option than having a real job. Because like even though people kind of knew who I was working on these kind of dead end projects, and so I when I got fired from that job, getting fired from every job I've ever worked. I got fired from that job for mouthing off too much, and then I decided to just say screw it, not have a job anymore, and I've been working for myself.
Your own boss. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it like comes to a point where like when you work freelance, like you spend so much time trying to get this skill down so you can express your ideas the way you want, and then you spend it all the time working on everyone else's idea, where you're just like,
well, yeah, like, or not working on anything at all, really, because I mean, if you're working at a company that has no style guide and the creative director is in a different continent and like nothing's getting done, I mean, you spend multiple years just kind of grinding away without direction, without really doing much at all. And you know, there's that, and then there's a bit of freelance where they're like, draw this pile of crates, or like, you know, draw this stupid thing that we came up with, or you know, you had a lot of commissions that are just like they're like unshowable. Like they need something for their game that's very specific, and it's just no good to anyone but them, and no one really wants to see it as a standalone piece of art. So like, you know, I did a little bit of that always on the side, and I think it was like late in my CCP days. Like at first they told me like, oh, you can't do freelance on the side. And then I found out one of my coworkers was doing magic stuff, and like the bosses knew about it. And I was like, fuck that. And I said yes to magic. And I did some magic during those years too. Like nights and weekends, I was always turning away on like a few magic pieces here and there. It built up. I think ended up doing around 50 of them over the course of my time. But it was like around the same time I stopped having regular employment was the same time I stopped doing magic, which was basically my only freelance client. I could never really get in with other game developers, or and like nothing else in the tabletop industry paid anything. Like you just starvation wages. There was like, and nobody was paying out with any rights or benefits or anything. So it was always like magic was basically it as far as freelance went. I did a couple of publishing jobs, but the publishing industry didn't know what to do with me, so it wasn't really a good fit. So yeah, like but then like, you know, you show up to a convention, you grab a few $1,000 over a weekend, and it's kind of easy. Like, start wondering how much of those you can do, and if you can really make a whole income on it. And the answer is yeah, definitely. Like if it's a good fit for you, that's like, it's way easier to make money selling your own art at conventions than it is trying to, like, I've been saying it before we started, making art as a service, freelance and stuff. And so that was like, I've been doing that a little bit like since I started drawing when I was like 16, you know, going to anime cons, setting up at a artist alley table and like selling whatever drawings I had. I mean, at the time when you're 17 years old and you make $300 in a weekend, and you know, it's like a lot of money to you. So that's I think that left an impression on me. And you know, I've been doing that basically constantly throughout my entire career, going back to 2002. I looked through all my old Anime Con badges piled up in my closet, and I found one back from 2002. So that's kind of where it started off.
Well, I mean, so where you're at now in your career, like you're working on the Angelarium thing. You're not doing freelance as much. You're doing your mentorship.
Yeah, I just not doing freelance at all. Like, you know, I mean, it's not really that I have like a hard bias against freelance. It's just that right now my Patreon is worth around $2,000 per painting, and it's been there for a bit. So it's like, if I were to do a painting for somebody else and it took the same amount of time as a personal painting, if it paid $1,000, I would be losing $1,000 on that job, because I would not get paid $2,000 for my Patreon.
Yeah.
So to get any freelance jobs, they have to $0 starts at 2,000, and then above that, like, then they want to own the rights to the piece, and they want to be able to control what's in it, and they don't, you know, are going to give me something that's not going to have like, so I can't license it, and I might not be able to sell prints. I probably won't be able to sell any prints, even if I have the rights. People might not want prints of whatever they ask for. So you start piling up the value of that, and you start looking at like, you know, 5,000-6,000 being like basically at zero. And then I basically just round it up and say, like, to do a freelance job, it has to pay $10,000, or it's just not worth it. and not on a emotional level, but on a purely economic numbers and, you know, dollars and cents level, freelance under 10,000 bucks is kind of like, doesn't make any sense for someone who like owns and sells their own thing successfully.
Mhm.
Yeah, they're just completely non-viable at this point.
Yeah, and it's like, so I've gotten really good at trying to say no in really polite ways and try to flatter people while I'm telling them no, because I don't want them to feel like I'm an asshole for like telling them that they're not paying me enough money. So I made those mistakes early in my career, you know, sending out emails just saying like, oh, sorry, you don't pay me enough. And like people don't respond well. Well, they're like that kind of verbiage, you know, like you have to actually, that's not the point. Like you're not trying to make them feel bad. So you should like, even if you're telling people no, you have to go out of your way to like make sure they don't feel bad about you rejecting them. But you know, it's been an interesting couple of years. The fact that I basically haven't had a single job that I could say yes to in that time.
The only thing that I like, the only thing that I like, at least from that standpoint, that I could think of that would be viable, I've heard people talk about, and I guess maybe you have some experience with it, maybe working for Magic, but like people that, like if you did like an oil painting, like you know, for like a Magic card or something like that, like something traditional where you can like make prints out of it, you can make play mats, then you can sell the original and stuff like that. I've heard of some people doing that before. And
well, let me bring up an example here of why this is a problem for me. It's like, so early on in my Magic career, I got pieces like this where they're like, draw an elemental. And I'm like, all right, great. And I designed an elemental that was my style. And people really loved it. And it was on a really good card too. So it's got like a whole fan base behind it. But then like towards the end, art directors had shifted and they're like, draw this specific ogre attacking this specific army on fire. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to try to paint the shit out of this ogre. But I remember, you know, my assistant was telling me, he's like, oh, before I met you, I remember seeing your work and going like, wow, this guy's got all this amazing stuff in this set. What's he going to come out with next set? I'm so excited to see it. And then he was bummed out to find out that I only had one card and it was this. Like, so even if I did this in oils, it's like I can put $1,000 price tag on this or a $5,000 price tag on it, but no one's going to want to hang this in their house. They don't care. So if you only get commissions that are like, even if you're working with the top clients, even if like the card is good, like people might not want to buy stuff. Like this was my very last commission. It was like, this is, I had tried to like go over to like making things in oils or making things in acrylics, and I actually did like this one halfway in acrylic. But somebody bought it, but I think they bought it as an oddity because it was the only Magic original I'd ever made. And I was someone who was prominent in the brand at the time. So, but it's like, you know, I have prints of this for sale, and I think I've sold 2 of them. So it's like the merchandising angle can be a thing. Like you can work for clients for access if there's access. Like doing comic book covers, the rates on comic book covers are terrible these days. Like some middle-sized publishers will be paying $150 per cover. And this is for major IPs. This is for shit people have heard of. This is for stuff that sells tremendous numbers of copies, and the budget they have for the art is $150. That can give you access to a fan base that will buy up originals at tremendous prices and be more interested in your work as a whole, and give you access to like a large body of people when you want to go independent. But aside from, it's hard to predict that. But that is the one case besides money where I think that the doing freelance could potentially provide real value is through notoriety like that. I think, but you know, that's like the classic thing that people always warn about is like working for exposure. It's become like this swear word almost. Exposure has become this like thing that everyone talks about in these hushed tones. It's a real thing, but it's also like totally a weird thing these days, you know?
I mean, I think deep down we all want people to see our work. And especially when we're doing like freelance and such, like, you know, anything we can do, it's almost like all the jobs that you do, you know, and the following that you build up is simply just so that you can kind of explode with your own thing.
Right. But I mean, we were talking about a former student of mine who just went ahead and just started doing the fan art that he wanted, and he's doing really well right now.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I honestly think that that's a step that is overrated right in the current state of things. Like, I know magic artists that are making less than $10,000 a year, and it's like, because the opportunities that present themselves to people like Noah Bradley and Therese Nielsen are not universal to all magic artists. So like, just getting that commission does not equal a golden ticket. Even if you're getting, you know, good cards or planeswalkers or whatever, it can take some time, and it can also take some business savvy on the side beyond just the commission work. You have to build an entire business out of monetizing that value. And at that point, you know, you got to wonder whether or not it's more worth it to just invest in yourself rather than doing work
Yeah,
for somebody
definitely.
else.
It sounds like more of an uphill battle to go that route than actually just trying to set up your own.
It's an uphill battle no matter how you slice it. I mean, you could say one path is easier or harder, but you can't say that any of them is easy, and nothing is guaranteed. It's a very difficult industry.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So what kind of spurred you on to, like, you know, start your, let's talk a little bit about One Fantastic Week. Like, when you started that, like, was that just to kind of like reach out to other artists and like just basically networking, or was it also to inform, I guess, what you were doing? Like, what was your purpose behind it?
The purpose for it started in a very small place, and then it blew up to something a lot bigger. Originally, I was thinking, as I was on my way out the door from Kabam, I was thinking, man, I got to figure out a way to stay relevant. Like, I got to stay, like, I got to make myself new media, because I'm not confident that posting JPEGs on the internet is a viable career. So I'm gonna make a web show, because I used to have a podcast called WIP Podcast back in the early days before I worked for CCP, like before I had freelance of any kind. Just as I was getting in the industry, I'd done it with a couple other artists, and my wife, and it was this plan to just sort of make a weekly vlog. You know, I wanted to make a web show where it was just me and a buddy who I talked a lot of convention stuff with. You know, talk to them about making artwork and like what was the day to day every week, to create a kind of interesting portrait of what it was really like being an artist. And after about 10 episodes, we ran out of shit to talk about, so we started having guests. And so it was a really small and selfish idea. Like, just needed people to look at me, and I was going to like raise my hand and try to capture people's attention every week, and that was going to be my plot, my ploy to stay like in people's minds. But what happened when we started talking to artists is we discovered that artists who worked studio jobs had a much harder time doing a good interview than artists who were independent, and that like we had more in common with artists who were independent. And we didn't even we weren't even calling it independent. We didn't even know what to call it. We were talking about artists who work on personal work was sort of what we were saying. And the more guests we had, and the more we tried to seek out people who owned their own work and were self-driven, the more we started to see overlap between their philosophies and their successes and their businesses. And we started to see like this space of interesting, diverse people who are finding success in their own way, on their own terms. And we started emulating a lot of what we saw from our guests on the show, and like me building a brand website and me building a online store and starting to sell limited edition prints. Like, everything I had done right with Angelarium to make money off of it came as a result of me following in the steps of people who had already who had been experimenting and had successes, and were willing to share those successes. And so the more that the show went on, the more it became focused in on this idea of what being an independent artist meant, philosophically and spiritually and socially. And then more of it became about like us trying to pass along this generosity that we had received from the people who appeared on our show and interacted with us as part of the community. Like, if we were going to receive all this if we were going to receive information from people for free that made us hundreds of thousands of dollars, we shouldn't hoard it. Like, this shouldn't be something that we just own. And Sam and I became a bit of experts by the fact that by the virtue that we were attending every episode and also getting all the behind the scenes and asking a lot of questions from these people who knew more than us. And so we become this sort of living repository for a lot of the info that's come through the show. But we still claim like we are like as much a student of this stuff as anybody who's a viewer. So like that's really been the trip, is that like it went from this completely selfish mission to this more altruistic one, and now there's a whole community around it where we're doing like a yearly workshop, and we're doing more community outreach all the time, and we're doing more speaking engagements, and we're really trying to offer our time as much as possible to like help advance people who want to get into this space and succeed in it.
Yeah, on that, I know that you're doing mentorships as well. Is there anything you'd like to share about that?
I haven't actually done a mentorship in a few months because I've turned down all the requests because I got really behind on my own work. And I had a hard time making my way to work on paintings because I was so wrapped up in the minutia of all the business stuff. And I've been unburying myself for the last few months, telling people just contact me in next month, just over and over again. And like I think I'm getting close to the position of being able to do them again. When I work with people, I think a lot of people come to me hoping to learn how to paint. And I typically don't work on painting skills when I talk with people. I typically talk about the stuff I've been talking about with you guys, which is, you know, reasons why the art gets made, what you do with it, where the value is, what are you making for your next piece, why are you making it, you know, how do you come up with ideas. And as those things get discovered, I mean, it reveals very personal choices. So I don't want to just make a bunch of people who are making Angelarium clones because I don't think that would work for them. I think that people need to find their own voice and their own success. And like, this means sometimes people need to be making fan art, and sometimes it means that they need to be making comics, and sometimes it means like they need to be making, you know, felting, like whatever it is that is their passion that like gets them going and like allows them to really make awesome, honest artwork. Like that is where they need to be. And so I try to help people through that process, and it ends up being more therapy than art lesson most of the time. But then after certain breakthroughs, there's some really practical like knowledge that needs to get addressed. Like if stuff really starts to sell, you know, how do you manage a shipping pipeline? What do you do to organize your business? Like practical questions like that start to emerge, but only after like major revelations happen. And so that's typically, people typically stop working with me before they got to all the really meaty stuff, because they it's those personal questions that end up leading to them needing to make like lots of new artwork. And they don't really need me for that because I'm not super good at just like giving them paint overs.
Yeah.
You know, so like I don't do a lot of paint overs. I want to talk to them about the artwork they make and not like make it myself.
Yeah, show what you would do rather than like what the decisions that they would make. And, you know.
Yeah, because I think that people evaluate artwork more on the decisions that are made than on the marks themselves. Like I don't think that people who consume artwork, whether they've got a strong artistic eye or not, really evaluate artwork on a technical level. I think that the technique has its place, but it's not the primary driving force behind people's successes and failures in their career. So I think it's an odd place to start when it comes to art education, and I tend to downplay it. Also, like you can find a lot of technical knowledge there's a tremendous amount of online resources these days. So like go online and look up some great gumroads. Like they're cheap. You don't need to spend $600 a month to have me to tell you how to like do shit in Photoshop. Like you can get that from people who are better equipped to teach you for like $10.
Yeah, I mean you got like gumroads and like Loomis, the James Ingram books.
Yeah. I mean, like I'll just like if you want to learn like proper painting stuff, like James Gurney, Loomis, like what is that one? Alla Prima, like
Alla Prima,
yeah, it's just like there's some really good books out there, but also a lot of that knowledge goes to waste unless you like know what you're painting and why.
Exactly.
So like I just want to start there, and then I don't feel like I need to be the person who like teaches someone the entirety of their art path. Like
Yeah.
I just want to like help them with that one step that I care about deeply, and I'm invested in like working with people on so that they can go and have other teachers and other learning experiences for the rest of it.
Well, I think
smart, yeah. Like you're more or less kind of helping them cultivate their own passions rather than, you know, just teach them how to paint, you know, like an Angelarium piece or something. Like, here's my step by step. And
Yeah.
then once they have that passion, you help them sort of approach marketing it.
Yeah. And typically, like what happens most of the time is they go like, "Oh, okay. So the next step is I need to make 20 more paintings, and you're not going to really be able to give me a lot of feedback." I'm like, "Yeah." So like, okay, well, I'm going to stop the mentorship then, and then they usually keep up with them over Skype or whatever, and like answer, or like Facebook chats, and just like answer specific technical questions about like, "Hey, where do you buy your packaging from?" I'm like, "Oh, here's a link," you know. And so it's like, you know, I'm not really in it for the money. I charge a lot of money for my mentorships because I want to create a barrier. So because I only have so much time to be able to dedicate for other people. Like right now I have 0 time.
Yeah.
So I have 0 mentees, but like, I don't think that this is something you can turn into a tutorial video. Like I think it's a personal conversation that needs to happen. And I make sure to like try to gate that off using money as a barrier.
Yeah, then you only get people that are 100% invested because obviously they spent that much, you know.
You would hope it helps, but it also there are still people who are trying it for the wrong reasons, who are willing to throw money at a problem without understanding what the problem is, and I try to filter it out through the like a email at the beginning to try to like figure out whether or not I think someone is going to have a good. I'm going to have an interesting conversation with someone, and it's going to go somewhere productive for them. And when I turn them down, it's not because I think that they're bad or I usually turn them down because I think I have nothing to offer them.
And
yeah,
I mean, I get that. Like a lot of people start out in the place of like, you know, wanting to do like art for a reason, but then they say, well, I need to get better. And then that getting better all of a sudden just takes over and you become obsessed with just like a technical prowess of the skill, you know, rather than like realizing that all of that is just supplementary to what you wanted to do in the beginning. So it's like they obsess with getting good rather than getting good for a reason.
You would be amazed at how many conversations I have where people say, like, I ask people, so what got you into making art in the first place? And they go like, I don't know. Like, so what's your big vision for the thing that you want to make? And they go like, I don't really have one. I just kind of want to get a job making games because I really love like concept art. And like, that's not to rag on people. That's like, you know, the way you were talking about it is like, yeah, of course, everyone's got a passion. They want to really make, they have a beautiful vision that they are obsessed with and they need to express it. And that's not true. Like a lot of people got into this not for that reason, and they are in trouble. Like they're in a dark place. They're headed down a really dark corridor, and they might find that they really got into this for a different reason than they expected. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is impossible for anyone outside of themselves to say. And so like, I don't want to just beat up on someone and be like, you fucked up, bro. You got into this for the wrong reasons. Cool artists only. Why don't you go get a real job? Like, I've seen people do that. Like, art directors do that to people. You know, I don't think that's fair. I've worked with people at every skill level, and like, what makes an artist a good artist? Like, it's not something you can really read from an email or a portfolio review. Like, it's an ongoing conversation and it's an ongoing process. And I don't think I've actually figured out a good way of like sussing out who's willing to have that conversation, who's gonna or not. But especially if you haven't met them in person, I think it's easier when you meet somebody like a show or something.
Yeah,
But over an email, it's like basically impossible.
I definitely agree with that. It gets to, I mean, like saying like whether like someone being like I don't know, and like I guess kind of like a like being a good artist or whatever. Like when you're having a conversation with that, the technical skill aspect of things, like I mean, I know some people who are like so technical, like they're like amazing at the technicality, but they're not that great with the expression of their ideas. Like they lose like all like passion for any of the ideas that they had to express. So if you're getting into like a concept art position, or you're trying to aim for that just because you're like, oh, I love video games or whatever, it seems just kind of like in a creative media, in a creative field, it seems like the wrong reason when you're just saying, oh, I just kind of like this, rather than being like, I think I could bring something to this.
I mean, I don't even think I can bring something to art. I think that's even too bold for me to describe to myself. I'd say that I have an obsession with making art, and it goes down to something like, it goes down not to a series of positive traits I have, but to negative ones, that it's really like my worst qualities and my worst flaws, and my attempt to compensate for them with art as a tool for like improvement as a human being and discovery as a person. And I think that it's flawed people who use art as therapy that are ultimately some of the most masterful artists. So I don't even think that the idea of, I think the idea of getting good is actually kind of the inverse of what really needs to happen. I think it's people who have it bad, who need, people who need art, who like because they're bad at other stuff. Like those are the people that are gonna kick everyone's asses when it comes to like showing off some really amazing art talent. I don't. I'm really losing faith in the idea of good art versus bad art. I think that it's slowly, it's difficult to rationalize. It feels so counterintuitive, and bit by bit, I think the more I've met people and worked on stuff, and more I've started to believe in the pursuit of creating bad art.
Yeah.
And that as being the ultimate real goal.
When we were talking earlier about your, hold on, I'm getting the feedback here. Hold on a second. Cole, take over.
For me?
No, it's from me. Okay, yeah, that's better. We were talking earlier about your ex-student that did like, you did some fan art and stuff that went successful. We were talking a little bit about Overwatch. It actually really, I found it very refreshing when I saw all the concept art for that game, because all of the concept art I see, you look at like Assassin's Creed and Batman, Arkham Knight, and all this other stuff. It's all like the super realistic, high rendered stuff. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, for some reason, when I saw the Overwatch fan art, it reminded me actually of Street Fighter when that stuff first came out, and like those initial like those
concepts are hot. Those concepts are so fucking hot.
They're just so good, man. I was just like, oh. Really, but then I found out that they actually got like a concept artist from like Udon or whatever that was like who used to work with Capcom as well to do the concept art, and I was like, okay, I see this now.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean like those Street Fighter 2 ones that were done like back in, what was it, the 80s, early 90s. Like those concepts are so bold, and like one of my biggest influences is Japanese art, and it's not just from anime, but from like 8-bit and 16-bit video games. Like they had to design stuff in this bold way because everything had to get turned into sprites, and even something like Street Fighter that had gigantic fucking sprites, they still needed to design things in a way that was so efficient and so expressive that they ended up sort of accidentally creating these like this brand of super expressive character design, where like the characters weren't just characters, but they were like these sort of tapestries of visual metaphor to create a mood and a personality on this sort of like hyper scale. And it's really exciting. And then you take that 20 years forwards, and the same tenets of that are still being used for that IP, And what's astonishing to me is that like somewhere along the line, we seem to have forgotten a lot about it. Like some of the biggest video game brands out there, they do a pretty good job, but only a pretty good job, I think, in comparison to some of the really early stuff. I think that you know, it's stuff from the 80s and 90s that really stuck, and I don't think it's just because of its primacy. I think it was because I think the limitations of that artwork necessitated they make something that was really iconic and great.
Yeah, as I was going to say, it was very iconical. Like,
yeah,
they had to catch the attention.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Angelarium, and that's all that is it's just a fighting game cast. You know, it's a bunch of different personalities done as character concepts. So like, yeah, they're technically representing these high concepts, but they're really, you know, they're those concepts embodied into a personality, into a figure, and that's like all Street Fighter was ever doing, or what Mega Man was doing on like a super efficient scale.
Yeah,
you know, it's like it's things like Street Fighter and Mega Man that really, really like are the big inspirations behind Angelarium, because like that's what I've been excited about since I was a kid. And you know, Ultraman is like, I think I put it like sort of the top of the pyramid in terms of inspiration chart, because I remember being like 5 years old and like being super stoked about Ultraman and not understanding why.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all that stuff, like I think it's all still really great. And I think that when people like my artwork, what they're liking is they're liking the things about those influences that still work today.
Mm-hmm.
So but I don't think they realize it. I think it's kind of I like that it's kind of buried and subversive, that like, you know, Angelarium is sort of billing itself as being a little bit higher brow than Mega Man, but I constantly judge myself on those criteria. It's like, what would this, if, you know, would this work as a video game boss? I think is my primary like judgment whenever I'm looking at my own pieces.
I actually have a lot of similar influences, so I was like very interested in what you had to say about that. If you ever look at like the Mega Man Zero stuff, like just how they handle forms in general, as well as like with Street Fighter and whatnot, like it's big because of those limitations, like what you said earlier, how they're handling the silhouettes. It shows like, you know, so you're like, okay, so here's the silhouette of this. Now we have to zoom it out, and you have to see this character on a very small scale. Is he still recognizable? And they really were able to pull that off with pretty much like all their characters, you know. So it was like that's just like a really high end. Like I got really excited about like seeing just like those larger forms, being able to recognize like from like a far distance, and just those are. I definitely think that like a lot of Japanese art are very masterful when it comes to just handling how they handle forms. I mean, basically.
Yeah, I feel like the better I've gotten at art, the worse I've gotten at that. Like, because you know, this piece is overly busy, and I'm going to try to find ways of like shrinking it in terms of defining a more iconic, like exaggerating certain aspects of it to bring out a more iconic form and you know, more expressive pose, like very similar to where I am right now with this piece, but still like. For me, going forwards with this, it's going to be a lot about subtraction rather than addition. And there's one or two elements I think I still want to add, but what I'm really going to have to do with this to make it work is subtract a lot away to bring forwards the key moments that I want to express about it. Mm-hmm. So like that philosophy still influences my moment-to-moment decision making when it comes to, you know, working on my painting step by step.
Yeah, that was something that I actually like, because you know how like a lot of times you post things these days, and like, you know, you got to either put like, if you're like in level up, and you got to put like CNC welcome or something like that. And
I don't post anywhere that requires shit like that.
Yeah, I actually like, I'm completely over. I've been over that for quite some time, because like I realized that, I mean, my heavy influence is still like a lot of anime stuff. Like looking at like Ocarina of Time, when it, like the art for that when it came out in '64, and Mega Man Zero, Street Fighter, all that other whatnot. So a lot of times these people would like suggest things, and like they'd be like, "Oh, your designs are good, but it's kind of simple. Maybe I'd add like a few, like a ton of trinkets and stuff like that on it, or whatever. Add like some more like cultural reference." And I'm like, but it just makes it overly busy and it looks ridiculous to me. So I mean, not that it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just like, you know, that's
it's not right. Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that are right for some people and not for others, and that's what makes critique so hard. Is because it requires the critiquer to either specifically speak to the application of the art, like, oh, you're an art director and this is going into a card game, and you could say, oh, you need to separate that character from the background because it's going to blend together when it gets smaller.
Yeah.
But it's like, or you have to know that artist really well and be able to say, like, you know, you've been doing this with your pieces recently, and this is something that's really important and iconic about your work, and you're moving away from it, you know, trying to be something that you're not. You really need to, you know, focus on what really means, what your artwork really like does best. And like, to know that about somebody requires a very personal conversation, and it just doesn't happen on places like Facebook or Twitter. It's not physically possible to have those kinds of conversations in those spaces. So I typically have steered away from online critique, both giving it and receiving it, because I've seen little value in like having these sort of surface level technical discussions when it comes to artwork.
Yeah, I think you definitely enter sort of like a relative area, you know, based on, because like you don't know what the objective of the artist was. Like maybe they
also, Level Up doesn't let you post links to your website, which means that you especially can't add context to it. And I think it's and then like,
I never understood, like, why not just let people share and promote themselves? Like,
well, they're like, yeah, also like no self-promotion, which means it's like, hey, this is a thing that exists in a larger context. And they're like, nuh-uh, this exists as a JPEG on our fucking thing. And I'm like, okay, well then why would anyone post here? Like, if they can't have a larger conversation about their work, and if they can't try to like advance their career, then why would they ever post on your board? Like, why is anybody posting there if those are the rules? That's a rant.
no,
end of hot take. But yeah, that's why I don't post there.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Let's talk a little bit about your Angelarium, since you kind of went into that with your forums, like with the characters. So is it, you said it's like the cast of a fighting video game, like in a way, like that's how you're approaching it? Is it
basically
a series of pieces, or is it going to be an actual narrative to it? What's up with it?
There's gonna be more narrative in the second book than there was in the first, but that's not really hard. I think I want to take a page from the sort of Dark Souls style of storytelling, where we're gonna share little vignettes that are gonna build flavor, but not really. There's a head I have a head canon, which I guess is the real canon because it's my thing. So it's like, I don't know how much of this head canon is actually going to improve Angelarium as a thing, as a brand or a product or whatever. So I'm still deciding how much of it is worth sharing, because I think that the best experiences people have come from relating to stuff through their own personal lens. I've had people talk to me about very, very personal things in their lives that the piece relates to it thematically. And if I were to explain the fiction of the piece, like, then they wouldn't relate to it as closely, and it wouldn't mean these incredibly powerful things to them. So, like, as long as I, keep it to speaking about the themes, it can be a bigger, better, more meaningful piece of artwork to more people. So I don't want to betray that.
Yeah, I actually really liked, I remember when the first Dark Souls came out, like when it was like in its infancy. Actually, well, Demon Souls was its infancy, but when Dark Souls 1 hit, like the storytelling was like very ambiguous. Like you knew like little bits of it, and because you only knew little bits of it, you kind of like started to develop your own like interpretation, like your own.
Yeah, it leaves it open to interpretation.
Yeah, the headcanon
personalizes it.
That's it.
But then it's like even more interesting to like, it kind of almost forces you to explore further, because you start to get curious about, like, I got like very curious about like the Artorias thing, like what all happened with a lot of those characters. And there's a lot more to it if you just dig deep enough.
Or watch all the YouTube videos.
I watched like a ton of like a Vadi video. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, I actually wanted him to do voiceover for my Kickstarter videos.
Oh man!
But I like never worked up the courage to like just contact him, because I figured he probably gets a lot of email. But yeah, I was gonna say something. Yeah. The other big influence in terms of storytelling is like in the same sort of vein is like the Team Eco games, and that's it. And like
Gotcha.
Last Guardian just came out. I just finished playing it, and no spoilers, but there is more cutscenes and more storytelling in that game than Shadow of the Colossus and Eco combined. And at first, I was like, "Oh my god, this is exactly what I wanted. It's like a movie. Like, there's more story. Like, I wanted more story, and now I'm getting it." And in the end, I'm kind of like, I don't have that rich headcanon that I did with something like Eco. And so I don't know if I am going to, it's going to stick with me the same way. Like, I think that more might be less in that case. So
That's what I loved about Shadow of the Colossus was like how little like communication there were. It was just his actions that were telling you who this guy was and what his level of dedication to that girl was. Like you understood him purely through what he was willing to go through.
yeah, and
It's
Guardian
fascinating.
has fucking voiceover through the whole game. Got voiceover narrative running through the whole game.
I haven't played it yet, so it's on my to get list because like I love Shadow of the Colossus, but I gotta wait for a paycheck. So I hope it's good.
It's worth playing, but that is the most uneven game I've ever played, and that's as far as my review will go on it. Because I know people got upset at me when I was at a group gathering the other night, and I was talking about my impressions, even if I wasn't even doing spoilers. Everyone wants that game to be good.
Well, that's the same way it was when when 15 came out. Because that game had been in development for so long, everyone was just like, "Oh, this thing has to be like this phenomenal thing or whatever." And yeah, it turned out to be like, I mean, it's a little above average, but you know, like a lot of people, like especially diehard fans, if you said something that was like, you know, anything less than it being amazing, they'd go off on you.
Yeah.
Blasphemy.
Yeah. And now on my Twitter feed, and people won't shut up about Chapter 13 or whatever that means. But we should probably talk about art.
Yeah. People are going to be like, we didn't tune in for game spoilers.
Yeah.
So aside from it, there was something else we were going to discuss besides Angelarium, wasn't there? So.
Yeah, I've got some like questions from our community or whatever. It's mostly magic oriented.
All right. Let's talk about magic.
Let's see. Someone wanted to know like how much time is allotted per like illustration, and does it vary like depending on like what faction like you're working on? I guess they're wanting to know how much like time you would spend on a magic illustration in general.
I'd spend about 30 hours on each piece. Even the ones I hated, I didn't skimp on them. It gave you, I think I remember it being about a month or two. They had pretty long deadlines for the gaming industry. So like they had some of the highest pay, they had some of the longest deadlines. But it also meant like if you only did one piece per wave, you only ended up doing 8 pieces a year. I think it was about 8 commissions per year. And that meant like, you know, a lot of people were, even at $1,000, you kind of had a soft cap at around $8,000 a year working on it.
Gotcha. Is there a role for traditional medium in card illustration?
Yeah, I think that it's probably more valuable for artists if they paint traditionally. But as I was talking about earlier, it's like they get to retain an extra bit of value by doing traditional illustration, but that's so contingent on whether or not the card's mechanics are good or if the brief allows for a compelling piece to be made. And it's popular to say, oh, well, you know, you can make any piece good, or it's up to the artist. Like, you know, it's a bad artist that's saying that to blame the brief, but oh my God, I've seen some shit. So I am willing to blame the brief to a degree, especially because they've gotten very, very specific over the past few years. I've heard some grousing, and like not just from a lot of people. Like the more specific it gets, the less it's possible for traditional media to be a valuable addition, because the more specific it gets, the more it just becomes World of Warcraft and less Magic the Gathering. You know?
Gotcha.
If you're gonna do like traditional media for like your card illustration, do you have to like? I mean, do you kind of have to have like a name typically, like for that kind of thing?
No. If it's a really good card, I mean, if it's a super played card, people will want it, no matter how good or bad the illustration is, or whether or not you're known.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if you are creating a iconic look for your work, like you think of someone like Therese Nielsen, who has a very iconic look to their work, that is very highly sought after, though it's especially rare in Magic nowadays because they seem to be hiring in order to avoid artists with iconic looks. So like you're likely to not get a job on the product unless you look very much like somewhere between Chris Ron and Tyler Jacobson, which makes it difficult to.
So they're trying to avoid,
those
like,
guys are also selling at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah, that kind of like hurts their recognizability, I imagine too.
Well, it's like if you're being asked to just be a worse version of an existing artist, you're going to lose to that artist, like in the marketplace. Like your originals are not going to sell at Chris Ron levels because A, you're not Chris Ron, and B, Chris Ron is better at being himself than you are. So, you know, his stuff's going to go to auction. It's going to make a lot of money. Like that's not something that someone coming in for the first time can expect, even if they make a good painting, even if they're good at painting, you know, like on a technical level. But it's worth a shot if it's something you're already good at. If you're really good at if you're good at image making, both digitally and traditionally, there's more value in being a traditional artist these days than there is in being a digital artist. It's one of the reasons why I'm exploring more traditional media right now. Phone's blowing up.
So someone also wanted to know, like, how you kind of did Magic come to you, or did you like kind of seek them out, and like what was the sort of atmosphere and like communication like with them?
I mean, I came to it at a very different time. I met one of the current art director, Jeremy Jarvis, at current for that time. He's currently working at a higher level at the company now, but he was doing portfolio reviews at Gen Con, and I've been getting the comment for years. People say, "Oh, you must work for Magic," because my style was similar to their house style.
Mm.
And I was like, "Yeah, people tell me my work looks like Magic," and he's like, "I agree, you're hired."
Just like that.
Just like he's like, "Yeah, I agree. You know, I'll give you an email," and he did, and it was like that is true for a lot of people who are good fits in terms of style. For people who don't fit the style, like I've watched people kill themselves for years and really bother the shit out of the art directors and really get nowhere with themselves or with that project because, like, you know, it's easy to sort of create a brand for yourself by accident just through like the pieces that you show around and you get known for. And then art directors don't always forget that. Like they will remember who they think you are and what they expect to see out of you based off the pieces that you've made. And if it doesn't fit their needs, they probably will never hire you, or they'll hire you only a little bit ever. The possibilities of having a long and fruitful career with Magic, if you don't naturally fit their style through your personal passion, is so low. I don't think anyone should pursue it, no matter what gains they think they're going to get on the other end. It's you're going to have to compete against people like me who naturally fit the house style, and you will lose in that fight. You'll never be as good as the people who do it naturally.
Yeah, I agree with that. The like so I mean, this is kind of like a, I don't know. I mean, this is an extended question, I guess. That's kind of just something I was thinking about. But like when Blizzard came out with Overwatch, that was kind of a stylistic shift. You know, from what they were doing. How do you think that, like, I mean, I knew that they hired on a concept designer or a concept artist that was like Udon Capcom or whatever. Do you think they just brought him in and was like, do what you do and we're going to adapt to that?
I mean, my impression of it was that the first guy who did concept art on that game was one of their former art directors and someone who had worked in fantasy for a really long time and had a really stylized look. Like, I remember there was a guy who talked to me at a bar at Gen Con one year who's like, "Yeah, I'm working on Blizzard's new thing. I'm the first person with pencil and paper. I can't talk anything about it." And, you know, I kind of got a sense of what that game was going to look like just off of that one nugget of information. But, I mean, he must have, he was in the right position in terms of the right connections, but also, like, I think the people who were writing the checks knew that they wanted a certain style, and so they picked someone who had already had that pre-existing style. Like, and then any freelancers they hired after that point, again, were like, people who are going to naturally behave well in that environment. People who fit that mold very, very well out of the gate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see, they've got only one more question from the community thing. Someone wanted to ask you, for like a struggling artist, what is the best way to practice to improve your skills? Like, I think we kind of touched on.
Yeah, give up on being good.
Yeah.
Number one, stop trying to be good at art. There's no such thing. Number two, think about what kind of art you would make yourself if you were 16 and you wanted to get away from the world and you wanted to like make art. Yeah, make art for the purpose of not having to think about why you're failing math class. You know, like make art for the reason that you are obsessed with anime and you don't know why, or like make art for the reason that you like love ponies even though you feel like you should have grown out with it by now, or that you have a hard time identifying with your place in the world and the people around you, and you need to make art that creates a world where you don't feel where you have some level of control and you don't feel strange anymore. Like, create art for those reasons first, and a lot of other things will fall in place after that.
That's what I've always figured. Is like if you just continuously paint, and sure, you want to maybe, depending on what you're going for, supplement with some like technical books like Loomis or something.
Sure.
But like if you paint all the time and paint what you're passionate about, I think you'll naturally see a progression, especially when you start looking at the other artists that are already, making money with their work, and you look at that as like a kind of a goal to hit, but you're doing it in your own way and with your own sort of look, your own aesthetics. The thing that will separate you and make your stuff uniquely iconic from theirs, rather than just like, okay, how can I fit in a niche? How do I get good enough to make my work look exactly like World of Warcraft or Call of Duty or whatever?
Yeah, like once you know what kind of art you need to make, a lot of it's a numbers game after that point. I mean, if you make 100 pieces, you're going to be better off than if you made 10. And way better than if you made one. Like, there are people I've seen that have managed to go into a dead end and make a ton of art, but I've also seen a lot of people find themselves through self-discovery, through trial and error, and people, they have a style that's really good, but none of their pieces have blown up, and it's like 50 pieces in that, one finally catches on, and they figure out like how to like do their gag that is just theirs, and
maximize on that.
Yeah, and it's just like you get that through repetition. Make a lot of art, like make an unreasonable amount of art. Like try to make, if you can make 100 pieces in a year, like you're going to do a lot better than the people around you. Watch what happens to your social media following when you start posting artwork. If you can put the people who do really well on Patreon and social media, and we're talking about Sakimi-chan and Kushinov, I think that's his name, Crown Prince. They post new finished art every day. And that's not because they're successful. They're successful because they post finished art every single day. If you can do that, you're not only going to get good enough to capture people's attention, but you're going to have enough art to make enough money at it to keep doing that. Like quantity matters way more than I've heard people give advice regarding it. It is the richest artist I know produces 200 to 300 paintings a year, finished original paintings. Working backwards from there, like I can tell you for a fact that quantity matters in terms of success level.
Yeah, plus I think you're really gonna, like, it's like you said, I think you're really gonna, like, if you do that amount of artwork too, you will easily identify with the kind of art that you actually like.
Oh yeah, you can't kid yourself for that long, but like quantity matters. Like if you just assume quantity might be the only...
It keeps you relevant too. Like if you're posting every day, then you're in the minds of those followers and they're going to be talking about you. Like the relevancy you gain from being that active is just as valuable as the pieces in of themselves.
I think that quantity might be the single largest indicator of success in artwork, at bar none. And I bet you if you look at some of your favorite artists who are successful, you will, like if you just go and look at their work from a totally numbers perspective, ignoring anything that resembles quality, you will see this trend exists. Quantity matters.
Obviously, that's like a one way to kind of cut to that. I mean, I know like if you take like a manga artist, for example, like take like one of the big ones, like the guy that does Naruto or something, or the guy that does One Piece, like the hours and the amount of content that they produce is outrageous.
Okay.
Like, yeah, it's outrageous. Like some of them get put in the hospital because they're working all the time.
Right. Like make artwork in a way that's so like the one weird trick to beat back the art industry is you figure out a way to make art that's so easy for you that you can make a ton of it without burning out. You can do that, you're fucking made. That gives you success on so many points. The master artists I know are not masters because they're amazing at their craft. They're masters is because they experience almost no fatigue from the process of creating art.
Yeah.
They create it so naturally and so in their own way that it doesn't feel hard. It's a release rather than a struggle. And working towards that as a goal will lead you towards higher quantity, higher quality, greater level of passion, more recognizability. And many people will steer away from it because they feel like they need to get good at the things they're bad at. And the reality is that you need to learn how to make the things that you're so good at, it feels irresponsible to do. It feels too good, too much like cheating.
Yeah.
If you do that, you are probably on the right track. And you'll probably get good at a bunch of things that people think are really hard, and you won't even realize they're hard for other people because they feel too easy to you.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually like a really strong piece of advice. Is just like you said, just find something that's just something you can do a lot of, produce a lot of, not burn out. And the more you do, obviously you're even going to improve on that and expand on it, and people are going to follow you with it. There's just nothing but benefit that can come from that. So
yeah, benefit in every way that matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Cole, do we have any other questions from the community group?
Let me check my list. I think that was the last one. Hold on.
Nobody asked how many pieces they should make.
Yeah.
Give me an example.
The answer is 100 paintings per year. You can do it. Anything less than 100 paintings per year is a loss.
Yeah.
I have lost every time.
Yeah, I've got one more here. I think he's talking about like working in like a studio environment. Is there an expectation of like heavy reference usage, or are artists expected to have like good enough anatomical knowledge and
yeah. This is the most amateur question of all time. Every artist who works professionally uses reference, and like the higher up you go, the more reference they use. And like I think there's an anxiety about it when people haven't had a lot of exposure to art as a career, and that's something like everyone needs to get over. Like, comic book artists, I think, use less than the average person, just due to the rigors of the number of like characters and poses they need to make. So they build up a really big library. And some concept artists do, but then some concept artists like do pure photo bashing. So it's like their entire piece is referenced because it's never actually going to get seen by the public.
That's what I figured, because like especially in a studio environment, like time is probably of the essence. You know what I mean? So it's just not viable.
Pre-production on a game for 8 years. You have a lot of coffee breaks.
Actually, I'm glad you just mentioned that. I had a question earlier when you were talking about your vampire game. Like, what was just out of curiosity, like what was like the feeling like of having like spent so much time on those pieces, and then like they don't even want you to like release them or anything? Like,
oh yeah, I mean it sucks. Like it sucks to feel like you are waking up every day to make art that gets thrown in the trash. Like it's demotivating. And I think that the video game industry is that a lot of the time. Like projects don't get canceled because the artist didn't work hard enough. They get canceled for business reasons. And like your job security and whether or not your work is getting thrown in the trash has nothing, you have no control over it. You are absolutely powerless in that environment. And I'm not like a bit of a control freak. I hate that feeling. Like, I will argue with the staff. Well, I'll argue with the management. I'll argue with the people who pay me about their choices because I think their choices are leading to my work getting thrown out. That gets me fired.
Yeah.
Anyone who feels like they'd be sensitive about that should like not plan on working in a studio for longer than a year or two, because you will go crazy and you will get yourself in trouble. It's still a good option, I think, for people in some situations. I recommend it on a semi-regular basis that people should go seek out studio jobs. But like, oh man, it's certainly more right for some people than others, and I'm like on the lower end of that.
Yeah, I think I'd be the same. Like, I've heard like some artists like talk about it, like, oh, worked on poster mock-ups or whatever for this movie, something for this game, and the public will never see that because they just decided not to use it. And I'm like, oh my god, I would feel like such shit, like doing all that work and like never getting to show it, and then people never seeing it. I don't know. It feels so useless.
It makes you feel small and useless, and I think that there's a lot of practices in commercial art that make artists feel small and useless, and it makes me frustrated because I've disliked when that's been true for myself, and I don't like the idea that other people are going through it either. But then I met artists who are in those kinds of companies, and they are really, really happy, and you know, they're non-confrontational, and they like keeping their head down. They like just focusing on the painting. They don't really, they care about the process more than like how the product's going to get used, and so they don't really mind so much when stuff gets thrown out.
Yeah.
So like there are people that are really good fits for it, and I recommend that if you like feel like those are your qualities, you should seek that out as a career, because even if that's a harder and less stable way to make money than owning your own work, then like you should go for what is a good fit for you.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm sure there's people that have different levels of attachment to the work they do. Like some people are more personal artists, whereas others just actually enjoy the actual process of creation in of itself.
Yeah, I mean, the process is really where the good stuff's at anyways, but like I just think like some people love to keep their heads down, and some people like they feel like they want to do something with their art. They feel like it's a part of them.
Yeah,
and they
passionate.
engage that. Yeah, and it's like they're both passionate artists, but the one needs to own their own work, and the other one doesn't. And there's benefits on both sides of the table, and like it's so hard to talk about without sounding judgmental towards one or the other. So I feel like I have to constantly remind people that I don't actually have I have a position where I feel most comfortable, and that is not the truth for everybody. Many of the ways that I paint and many of the decisions I've made about my career are absolutely wrong for you, the listener. Like, but yeah, I want to share them anyway, because I know that for some people out there, they're right, and they don't realize their options.
Yeah, I mean that's also like that can become a huge. I don't know. Everybody kind of wants like those answers of like what is the formulaic way to success, when you realize that you're in a creative field and you're like, if you have this entire career to make these decisions for yourself. There's so many ways to do this your own way. I mean, there's like, I mean, you know, when we live in a world where people make their living off of YouTube reactions, and then you know, you can sell your work any multitude of ways.
Anything's possible.
Anything possible.
So speaking of YouTube reactions, this is actually kind of interesting. I love seeing when my philosophies cross over into other industries. And YouTube is actually something I'm becoming interested in as a hobby, like as a study. A lot of people are reacting to the changing algorithms of YouTube right now, and this is actually a really interesting case study for the entire industry of people who are trying to like make money creating things on the internet. There is one of my favorite YouTubers, the guy who does a show called Game Theory, did a yearly update video about the theory of YouTube, and he had a whole breakdown based off of the looking at statistics of his own channel and other ones that were participating. People opened up their books to him and showed their numbers looked like, And it turned out that a lot of the things that YouTubers were saying about what was working and what was making their YouTube channel successful were all wrong. And he broke down what he believed the real metrics to success were. And they were daily, it was a combination of daily engagement and watch minutes. So like likes and comments didn't matter, views didn't matter. Like all the things that people think are metrics of success were completely irrelevant in that environment. That it was the amount of time that people actually sat and watched a video you were making and the likelihood they were going to come back and watch the video the next day. That was a measure of, those are real measures of engagement. And when you think about why somebody's going to do well with their artwork versus poorly, the idea of like people being interested in looking at their artwork for a long time and also whether or not they're interested in what the next piece are going to be is a greater measure of success than like whether or not people think it's badass. Or like if it's cool or if other artists like it or if it's got a lot of views or if it gets shared on social media, like engagement level means you have some captivity over a certain audience, and that gives you the ability to build value in your work and have visibility and like all the things that come with that, which means income, stability, the means to make more art in the future, the ability to connect with people on an emotional level about something you care about, like things that really matter. There's an undercurrent and it's difficult to see because the metrics that we see online don't represent it very well. So I recommend checking out the Game Theory YouTube channel. Like most of it is really weird, kooky video theories about video game characters secretly being evil or undead or whatever. But then he has these deeper dives that I think are really, really great.
That's actually really interesting because it kind of mirrors what we were talking about with the going the route of quantity to kind of maintain relevancy and communal outreach. Like that is
right. It's like when I think about that as being a core thing, and then this guy says, yeah, that's actually what YouTube is looking for is like daily content. And this is actually in part like a way of them having, what do you call it? Like big channels like late night shows that do daily broadcasting are like now being way high in the trending bar and way high in the recommended lists for YouTube because they fulfill those criteria because they've got an entire team of people that are releasing content. And it makes it's becoming, the complaints are coming because it's becoming more difficult for independent creators to succeed. But if you look at someone like Sakimi-chan or Ilya Kubshinov and how they are using Instagram, like, yeah, because they're making artwork that's easy for them and because they're making it daily and releasing it through platforms where that's a natural fit for them and the algorithm that exists in that place, they're able to dominate, just absolutely dominate. And then people subscribe to all sorts of stuff. Oh, it's because they draw porn. Or, oh, it's because it's cute anime girls. It's like, no, it's not. It's absolutely not.
The community gets something new every day is why, and they're going to keep yeah.
I can tell you that there are artists that do really well independently, like that don't fit that mold, and people don't include them because it doesn't include their preconceived worldview on what should be successful or not. Like I had a friend say like, oh, there's this guy I keep shoving my Facebook feed who draws porn. I bet he's making $1 billion. I went and looked at his Patreon. He was making $200 a month. I was like, I'm making 10 times as much as this guy on Patreon. Like drawing like faceless weird angel creatures. Like, no. Drawing porn is not the solution to making money at art on the internet. Like it's a solution. If you love making porn, you should do it. And if you have like a great passion to make a porn comic, like, yeah, absolutely. There's a market for that and you should follow your passion. But like if you feel like down on yourself because you're not making like what you perceive to be popular, like check yourself. Take a real look at what qualities are really leading towards success and failure in this marketplace. It's probably not like what you have in your head. Like stand back and look at what the real metrics are. It's
there's a lot of benefit to your passion being something that God, I'm still getting that feedback. Okay. Let's see here. All right. What I was saying was there's actually a lot of benefit to your passion being what isn't in at the moment. because you have less competition. I mean, if you're gonna do, if you have like excitement toward doing something and nobody else is doing it, that's golden. Like there's no room for complaints there. So it kind of comes down to like for at least in my opinion, it comes down to just those two variables. Aside from what you said, just doing like the quantity of work is what you're doing with the skill and how you're marketing it. Because there is the artist, the creative side, and then there's the businessman and how you get people to see your stuff.
Yeah, they're really separate skills. One of them is about making the work, and the other is telling a story about the work, and they're both really, really valid. The salesmanship part of the artwork is something that some people are definitely better at, but it's I think it's as much of a learned skill as rendering or any artistic pursuit. So it's worth learning to improve at if that's a necessary skill for you to advance your career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. As well as like, I think that another really good aspect, I guess, just while we're talking about that area, is that if you're going to do something that has like a specific niche, don't think so much about trying to market that to other artists. Like it seems like everybody tries to do that, and that's completely
yeah.
It's like, okay,
don't try to get artists interested in your work. Get human beings. Like non-artist humans are like what you really, really need.
Yeah, like if you
that's the real market.
Yeah, like if you like manga, post in manga or anime groups. If you like porn, find porn groups. If you like fantasy, whatever, post in fantasy. It's reach out to people that have an interest in that thing. Don't just reach out to people that are. I don't know. It's like people get into that corner of the world and they're like, oh, I got to get like accepted by the group of artists. No, get accepted by the audience that you want to sell this to.
Yeah, being respected by your fellow peers is good, but I can tell you, I know people who are perfectly happy to be despised by the art community and do really well privately and have people around them that understand who they are and why they make what they make. And that's, I think, as worthy to aspire to as acclaim, commercial acclaim. I think there's too much credit put on success as part of a commercial product and not enough success on the idea of people doing well being themselves. We're really judgmental. Artists are very, very open and welcoming, but they can also be a bit of a judgmental crowd. I know of artists, and I'm not going to name drop, that people think are really bad artists, but privately do so well. They just, under their breath, tell everybody to fuck off because they can afford to tell everybody to fuck off because they've made a great deal of money off of being themselves and making what they truly enjoy. Yeah. And they think the idea that everyone's killing themselves trying to please art directors is a silly, stupid, shallow pursuit. And so like both sides don't talk to each other. I think it's important that we all just we pay closer attention to each other's actual like desires and needs rather than like some arbitrary perspective on what we think we're supposed to be or what we think what's supposed to be good.
I've got actually a technical question for you real quick. I've been watching you pull up these gradient maps. Are these like ones that you've pre-made that you just kind of like
a lot of them are pre-packed in Photoshop.
Gotcha.
But like, I mean, I was kind of in a space where before I had all my my value work done. I had these gradient maps. I was like, I think I know where I'm going with the color palette on this. And then I flipped them back on after I had done the value work. I was like, I don't think I do know where I'm going with these gradient maps.
Yeah, I see you going from like a cool palette to a warm palette. Like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, and it's like, what I'm thinking I'm not doing enough of is I'm not breaking it enough because like, I think that the place where you get the best results is when you really fuck it up.
Generation lag. visual interest.
Yeah, it makes them, when you start someplace really gnarly and then you try to fix it a little bit, like, you know, you can end up with your absolute best stuff there. My best pieces have come from me intentionally making really gnarly, ugly things and seeing like what was interesting about them. And so I've tried to pursue that as a goal. Oh, let's see, there was this one difference. Difference is the worst. Blending mode. And I have a friend who look at this nonsense. I have a friend who like actually paints on difference layers as his primary like working layers, and I still don't understand it. Oh man, what the fuck? It's really easy to make stuff that is just maximum level ugly, which I think is great. I love, this is one of my favorite things about digital art. Like the points where people have praised me the most for my innovation are times when I have like thrown caution to the wind and I'm like, let's make something that looks shitty. Let's get real shitty. And when I can get to the maximum level of shittiness and then start to look into it and get past the judgment and start asking what's really interesting about this thing I'm looking at, I'm able to find something that I didn't choose to make, but I get to call my own because I found it there out in the ether, and then I get credit for it somehow.
It's organic experimentation.
Yeah, leave yourself open to like be surprised.
It seems like you're just able to swap like entire color palettes really quickly. Like I've seen a lot of like grayscale to color methodologies, but like this is next level. Like let's like overlay a rainbow gradient map on difference layer and see what happens, and you end up with, I gotta tell you, man, like this is not a print I would sell, but like the way that it goes from the way that it does this sort of oil slick thing, going through these colors like this, there's something there. I like it. Like I've liked like 50 different versions of this as you've been like transforming it. Like I'm like that could work. That could work.
And it's like, you know, okay, this doesn't work, but like there's something about it where it's like
it looks good though. It kind of does work. Like if you like went in like on a layer above with another brush and like just built it up.
Yeah, or like can we reapply this downwards, like you know, via
your entire value scaling? Like look at that. I mean, it's awesome. I'm gonna play a gradient match now. Like it's not something I had.
Yeah, like it's like, is there a version of this that starts to get like someplace where we can get back to, you know, someplace really, really interesting.
Do you do like a lot of just exploration where you just like play the maps for like a couple hours and see like which
one? And if I'm good, I'm doing that. If I'm bad, like sometimes some good pieces, some of my successful pieces have come out of me finding an image that I know I like the color palette, and I'm just like, I'm stealing that color palette right now. And there's other pieces that have come out of me like getting halfway through a piece and deciding that it wasn't working, and then deciding to break it and try something totally new. And those experiments have trying to find things that are broken have led me to some of my greatest discoveries stylistically.
Yeah, like your most standout pieces.
Yeah, and things that I'm really, really proud of. And I get to claim ownership over this process, even if it is like I'm a little bit uninvolved in a certain way, you know, because I'm just flipping through options.
Yeah, just like I'll flip this switch, see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I set it to difference to make it just fucked up, and then I'm gonna start flipping through all these gradient maps to see what comes out. And you know, I could just flip through number keys. I keep liking this one a lot, but this is untenable. Like,
yeah, I kind of like that one too, because it almost made like all the ground look like it was part of the robes or something. So it was just like,
oh yeah,
this figure's got like mile-long robes that are just like dragging.
Right. Yeah, and like that's maybe a thing that I discover part of the way through the piece. Like, I would love to get that shit worked out early on, but if it takes me halfway through the piece to discover the most interesting bit, like, so be it. I'll take that and I'll work with it, because I really like that one. The yellow and the black, that is so weird.
Awesome.
I should, I could turn it down also, because gradient maps, you could like grab each of these handles and adjust them. So I can like make this yellow back down a little bit. People would complain. I had a collector complain my last piece, the highlight color was too bright, and he said he didn't like it when he saw the JPEG, and then he saw the print, and he's like, I've never seen such a huge difference between a digital version and a print before. I was like, yeah, it's because I'm painting for print. I'm not painting for a JPEG.
Yeah.
But the reason why anyone buys anything is because they saw the JPEG first. So I have to respect both sides. And turning this dial around here is getting crazy.
So do you work like in CMYK then, since like you aim for like prints?
No, I just know that like certain color relationships or textures or whatever are going to print, are going to look especially good in print.
Gotcha.
And I know, like, I'm thinking about the piece, and when I'm looking at the piece, I'm imagining it large. Like, what is this going to look like when it's given presence?
Yeah.
It's given wall space. But it also needs to look good, like, at a distance, because I want to see, people are going to see it as a thumbnail when they see it online, and they're also going to see it at a distance if they see it in person, and so it needs to work in those respects as well.
Definitely.
So, I don't know if I've done a green one in a while. I do a lot of cyan. I found myself drifting into cyan and orange.
You have like some safe color palettes that you have like backlogged if you just need something to work.
Well, it's not that I have safe ones. It's that like I play around like this, and then I settle on the same ones over and over again. So
something you like about
yeah, certain ones that I really like, and then every once in a while I'll go like, oh, man, I should do this like I did.
I gotta do something different. Yeah.
And then sometimes I'll just again, like sometimes I'll break out of my usual rut by like borrowing somebody else's rut, like finding some artist I really like and trying out their skin for a bit, playing around with their inspiration and seeing where it leads me personally. That's been really good. Like whenever I copy another artist's style for like an Angelarium piece, like I try to make sure it's obvious and clear to people that I'm borrowing somebody else's clothes for a bit, because I don't want it to feel like I'm like stealing from them. I want them to know that like I'm a fan and I'm trying to honor.
Yeah, I liked your stuff.
And like I try to hold the same thing, because like some people get really bugged when their style gets ripped off. But when I've actually started to see more and more like people copying some of the tropes that I've done, and clearly use my work as the source of inspiration. And I committed early on to that being a goal for myself. And so to me, that is a great honor to have my work be considered so highly that someone wants to rip it off.
Yeah, it's got to be flattering, It's like, wow, this guy really liked my stuff to that degree that he wanted to.
I think it should be flattering, and so I make sure that I never get so full of myself that I don't feel that way. Like of course they want to emulate me. Yeah, people emulate. And when I see people emulate me, like I'm genuinely honored by it, even when it's like really close, like it's clear which piece they're ripping off. The point where I think it's really funny is when it shows up in like games or whatever. Like I've seen a couple of things in big games that I'm like, oh, I totally know. I was on a style board somewhere. There's a monster in Dark Souls 2 that is absolutely a character I made for Magic.
Which one?
There's like in the woods in Dark Souls 2, there's these big meaty guys with a hook.
Oh yeah.
They are ripped up. They are almost a 1-to-1 copy of Grim Grin Corpseborn, a Magic card that I designed the character for. But I was also doing that within a style guide, so it's like I was also, lifting off of I think some designs that Steve Belladin had done. But it's like the stuff that I had added to it specifically, like that weird hook that didn't make any sense. Like the things that made very little sense about it were the things that made it into the final product. So I was like, I'm gonna take ownership of that. And then like there's a couple of bits of like there's a couple of bits of games that I've seen here and there. I don't want to call them out because I might be speaking too much. But then I have people tell me like, oh yeah, I'm working on this game, and the art director just sent over a Pinterest board that's half your work. You know, so it's like, even though these companies aren't hiring me, like I'm still getting artwork into a lot of stuff these days. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean, at least you kind of get to see it come to life indirectly. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a character in the last StarCraft expansion. I was like, whoa, okay, this is kind of cool.
That's good.
But I would love it if people were to tell me specifically, like they're like, oh, I worked on this game, and yeah, the art director was a big fan of yours, and just like gave us a bunch of your stuff. Like, I would think that's cool more than because I'm not gonna sue them for, having a similar style.
What's the case going to be? Style infringement? Like, I mean,
yeah, right. So, like, I just like to know because just for my own personal ego.
Yeah, just for
I did that.
Well, I had a friend who did a piece for a client, and I was like, that looks like I could have just posted that on the Angelarium website. And so I asked him, I was like, dude, that piece is a spot-on Angelarium piece. And he's like, oh, thanks, man. Like, the art director just gave me a pile of your work and told me to do one of those. I was like, awesome.
Awesome.
Like, I honestly think, like, that's like the pinnacle. That's what we should all be shooting for. Because like you can't do better. You can't do better than that, in my opinion.
No, I agree. It's awesome.
Well, Pete, we're going on about an hour and a half now, man. There's something that we usually do toward the end of the interviews that we like a words of wisdom thing, I guess. I think you honestly said it earlier where you were talking.
Oh boy, yeah. I went out of my way to try to go off on all of my big points. I'd say when you understand what it means to make honest artwork, you're going to have a lot easier time from there on. Like, it should be goal number one. That should be what you're shooting for as an artist, is to make artwork as easy as possible and to make it as honestly as possible, because I think the two go hand in hand.
I completely agree. As for like your Angelarium piece, and like you say, you have a Patreon as well, or like website, like are there like
Angelarium.net is where you can see all of the Angelarium work that I've made and bits of writing about a bunch of it, and then there's also a store on there if you want to buy the book. There's a big link on the front page for the Patreon. Like, Patreon backers get to see all the pieces in progress. So I'm posting 3 to 4 work in progress updates per piece, so you can see them come together at high resolution.
Behind the scenes, yeah.
Yeah, behind the scenes. Some people really like getting I especially format pieces for wallpapers. So like I'll actually rearrange the elements to make like landscape versions of every single piece in addition to cropping them. So I make one of those for like $5 backers, so they get like their custom Angelarium wallpapers and stuff. And
Awesome.
and those are the kinds of rewards. The very highest tier, if someone really wants to if they want to collect all my limited edition prints, which I only make 50 of each for the most part, those you get to reserve. You can reserve those at the $75 level, which means that you're just basically pre-buying them, but then you don't have to pay for shipping, and then you always get them even if there's a big run on them. And there's only a handful of slots for that. So if somebody really likes the work, they can back at the $75 level and reserve a number and just always get that every time I get a new piece. And I send gifts out to those people as well. So they got a Christmas gift this year with a bonus piece.
One other thing is like, I don't know, kind of promote yourself a little bit, but when's your next Fantastic Week going to be?
No, every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, 11 Eastern. Okay. We do a web show where we interview artists and we talk to them about why they're making their art, what they're into, what they're doing right now. You know, just talking shop the way that artists do when they get together.
Basically what we did just now.
Yeah, a lot like what we did just now. And it's less about how to be a great artist and more about like, let's get together and talk about this stuff so that we're not all stuck in our heads doing it alone. You know?
Definitely.
Definitely.
Oh man, I'm kind of.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on and doing this with us. We really appreciate it, and definitely thanks for showing off one of your pieces here and giving us.
Yeah. I feel like I actually got to get some work done. Thanks so much for like. I didn't think I was going to get any painting done tonight. Thanks for having me on and keeping me on track.
Oh, it's been good. You've been great. You know, just definitely we'll keep in touch and, you know, just keep doing what you're doing. Look forward to see what you come out with.
Yep.
All right. Good luck with your work. Good luck with the show.
Yep.
Thanks a lot for having me.
Later.